Kirk Cousins is the Minnesota Vikings quarterback. And he is, in fact, a good quarterback. I like him. When you watch his tape, there are honestly just too many things that are good. You can't deny the fact that he's good at his job. Now, the first thing I like about Kirk Cousins is the way he handles blitzes. There's a play week 1 against the 49ers, it's 3rd and 8. And the 49ers bring a blitz. They bring extra defenders, meaning they have fewer guys in coverage. Kirk Cousins stays calm. He understands that the blitz means he has a good matchup outside. He throws to Adam Thielen for a 15-yard gain. And I really like that. That's a guy who understands blitzes and is calm under pressure of a blitz. He's like, okay, they're bringing extra guys, got a good matchup, that's great. And not only that, but over and over and over again, Kirk Cousins really impressed me with great throws against man coverage. Repeatedly, teams would give him a man coverage on the outside, and he would shred them. Kirk Cousins is really good against man coverage. This is a strength of his. He also does a really good job manipulating defenses with his eyes. There's a play week 4 against the Rams, and Kirk is disciplined with his eyes. He looks right, then snaps his eyes to the left and throws to Stephon Diggs. This is a really good route and a great completion to move the sticks on 3rd down, but the reason why this was made possible, it was made possible by the eye manipulation of Kirk Cousins. This is not a completion without Kirk Cousins' eyes. Stephon Diggs, the wide receiver, is trying to convince defenders that he's running across the field. Kirk understands he has a great matchup on the left, and the entire time knows he's going to go to Stephon Diggs eventually. But the route needs time to develop. If Kirk had stared left the entire time, he would have brought other defenders to the area, and the route would not have been open. Stephon Diggs would not have been able to sell the route. This completion was made possible by Kirk Cousins' eyes. Again, the guy does a lot of things really well. There are, I've said it before, I'll say it again. There are simply too many good throws on tape to be ignored. Kirk Cousins is a good quarterback, but here is where I will draw a line in the sand. He is good. He is not elite. And what that means is that he's not one of the top quarterbacks in the entire NFL. I'm sure that's not a shocking revelation. He's a tier below guys like Tom Brady, Drew Brees, and others. Because for all of the good moments you see, a good throw against man coverage, he handles a blitz really well. He manipulates a defense with his eyes. For all those really good moments, you also see a lot of moments where he misses on small details. I can't call him an elite quarterback because there are too many moments I'm uncomfortable with. He misses a lot of throws. He's just weirdly inaccurate out of nowhere at times, and often at crucial moments. There's a 3rd and 5 against the Bills where he had Adam Thielen open and just completely missed. It's not just physically, though. It's also mentally. Week 2 against the Packers, there's a mix-up in coverage. The Packers are playing cover 3 cloud. What that means is, first of all, traditional cover 3 is where the field is broken up into 3 deep territories. A safety plays a deep middle third, and then the corners on each side, the right and the left, play the right and left deep third of the field. The field is broken up into 3 boundaries for defenders to cover. Cover 3 cloud is a different wrinkle on that same idea. In cover 3 cloud, the field is still broken up into 3 deep territories and 3 deep areas, but the responsibilities change. Only 1 corner drops to cover a deep third of the field. The other 2 areas are covered by safeties rather than corners. 1 safety each covers a third of the field. It's basically the same coverage, but the key difference is that one of the corners doesn't drop back to cover a deep area of the field. I'll explain it from a quarterback's perspective. The safety on the left side of the field takes the deep third along the left sideline. The safety on the right covers the middle third, and both safeties believe that the corner on the right side of the field is going to cover the deep third along the right sideline. Clearly, they're not on the same page because the corner gets confused and doesn't do that. He allows Adam Thielen to run right past him, either thinking he had help or just got confused. I don't know what happened, but he allows Adam Thielen to get right past him. The point is this. Adam Thielen is wide open, and Kirk Cousins doesn't get him the ball. And look, it's awkward to point out things like this. I can acknowledge, I played quarterback in college. I can acknowledge that when you're watching game film from the angle of a press box higher from up above, the game is different than when you're playing quarterback in the moment. But no matter how much you empathize with Kirk Cousins, a top-tier quarterback, guys like Drew Brees and Tom Brady, would not miss a busted coverage like what the Packers did here. Instead of throwing for a touchdown, Kirk Cousins simply scrambles for a 1-yard gain. And that's just the beginning, by the way, of all the weird mistakes and weird plays Kirk Cousins has. Against the Jets, he's inaccurate on the goal line and costs his team a touchdown. Week 11 against the Bears, he misses an easy, wide-open touchdown to Stephon Diggs. It's just weird. Kirk misses far too many opportunities for me to feel comfortable calling him an elite quarterback. Now, the real breaking point for me, though, was the pick six in the fourth quarter against the Chicago Bears. So for context, it's week 11. The Vikings are 5-3-1. The Bears are 6-3. This is a big divisional battle with playoff implications. The Vikings are down 14-6. There's 8 minutes left, and this is a big moment. It's a pivotal drive. And guess what? Kirk Cousins throws a pick six. And by the way, it's a bad read. This is a very simple read. The Vikings run a smash concept. They have a short route in the flat with a corner route behind it. You're supposed to read the corner, that defender. If he backs off and plays soft, you throw the open route in the flat. Instead, for some reason, Kirk Cousins doesn't do this. The corner backs off. The flat route is wide open. But instead, Kirk floats the ball up to the corner route. It's the wrong read on a simple concept that quarterbacks run from the time they're in 8th grade. They run it their whole lives. Eddie Jackson intercepts the pass and runs it back for a touchdown. Suddenly, the Vikings are losing 22-6 in the fourth quarter in a giant game against the Chicago Bears because of their quarterback. There are just far too many weird moments like that from Kirk Cousins. He does so many good things. I want to like him. I want to root for him. I want to call him a great quarterback. But his attention to detail limits him from being a top quarterback in the NFL. He's not elite. In fact, the term I would use is something I don't say very often. Kirk Cousins is exactly a system quarterback. Now, usually when people say system quarterback, it's because they're being lazy, right? It's not a very good term. People often misuse it. But I think it really, really fits very well with Kirk Cousins. Look, it's obvious. Every quarterback benefits from having great play calling. Just a fact, right? But when I say Kirk Cousins is a system quarterback, what I mean is that he's only as good as the plays called and designed by his offensive coordinator. Look, it's obvious, but true. His success comes from play calling. There is no extra from Kirk Cousins. Tom Brady's not a system quarterback because if a bad play call is made, he'll change it at the line of scrimmage. He's not limited by his offensive coordinator. Patrick Mahomes is not a system quarterback because if a bad play call is made, he can still make it work. He can run around or do something ridiculous with his arm. There's none of that. There's none of that extra stuff from Kirk Cousins. Again, every single quarterback benefits from having a good offensive coordinator. But Kirk needs a good offensive coordinator. More than the offensive coordinator needs Kirk Cousins. He's only as good as the guy calling plays. He's not running around extending plays. He's not making ridiculous throws, and he's not changing many plays pre-snap. He's vanilla. Kirk Cousins is a fine NFL starting quarterback. He's a good one. He's good at his job. But he's not elite. He's good, not special. It's so harsh. It's true though. I would liken Kirk Cousins to the Dallas Cowboys quarterback, Dak Prescott. They have very different strengths and very different weaknesses, but the one sense they are similar is that both Kirk and Dak can win games if you support them with a good team and good play calling. But they're both also only as good as what is around them. It's not necessarily a bad thing, right? If Kirk Cousins has help, he can win a ton of games in the NFL. It's not necessarily a knock against you, right? You cannot say that every quarterback in the NFL can win games. Kirk can. He's better than most. He's a solid, I think even I would use the term franchise quarterback. He's a good quarterback. He's good. He's not elite. He's not special. There's nothing extra, though. Now, statistically, 2018 was one of Kirk Cousins' best seasons in the pros. He threw for 4,298 yards, 30 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, and had a 70.1% completion percentage. And yet, despite all that production, the Vikings still went 8-7-1. They missed the playoffs. Their offensive coordinator got fired. So what happened? What beyond Kirk Cousins went wrong for the Vikings offense? One of the major reasons for the 2018 Vikings offensive struggles was because their offensive line was terrible. They were awful, awful, awful. Now, I want to be careful here. I want to be sensitive to the fact that you have to acknowledge a big thing that I believe factored into the Vikings offensive line struggles was that their offensive line coach, Tony Sperano, died in July right before training camp. Very sad. Death is horrible. My younger brother died 3 years ago. Loss is always terrible, and it affects you in a lot of ways. And it's very clear to me that without him, the Vikings offensive line really struggled. Now, another factor, though, is that their group did have a number of injuries. A lot of people always cite, well, the Vikings offensive line was injured all the time. And yes, but that's not a good enough excuse. The starting 5 offensive linemen for the Vikings still played over 75% of the Vikings' total offensive snaps. Even when the starters were healthy enough to play, they did not do their jobs well. They got beat all the time. Constantly, these guys were getting beat by defenders. They couldn't block a 4-man rush, and they couldn't win matchups running the ball, even when they had numbers in the box. And here's what that means. Football is all about matchups, often about math. There are 11 defenders on the field. If a defense brings 4 guys to rush the quarterback, it means they dropped 7 guys back into coverage. Most teams have 5 wide receivers, sometimes 4, sometimes even just 3. The simplest way to put it is this. No matter how you do it, if a defense can drop 7 guys into coverage and get pressure on a quarterback with only a 4-man rush, it creates a losing math equation for the offense. It's the simplest, most concise way I can put it. In fact, that's largely how the Giants slowed down the Patriots in the Super Bowl when that Patriots had that undefeated season. The Giants were able to get pressure with a 4-man rush, and it caused problems for Tom Brady in that Super Bowl. Because the Vikings offensive line was so bad, basically every single team they played was able to get pressure with a 4-man rush. It's really hard to win when you can't block a 4-man rush. Guys got beat over and over and over again. In week 8, the Saints, in fact, at one point only brought a 3-man rush. And the Vikings were unable to block 3 guys with 5 offensive linemen. That is atrocious. That is horrible. For context, when the Eagles quarterback Carson Wentz dropped back against a 4-man rush, he was not instantly under duress. He had time to read the defense and do his job. And that is the standard. If a team brings a 4-man rush, you got to be able to block it. And the Vikings were unable to make that happen. Kirk was regularly unable to go through his read progressions because of how quickly pressure got to him. The Vikings couldn't pass block. They also couldn't run block either. The box, or the tackle box, is an important vocabulary word you need to understand for this part. The box is an arbitrary area around the line of scrimmage. The box includes all 5 offensive linemen, any tight ends or wide receivers, or potential blockers that are tight to the line of scrimmage, and then also includes any and all defenders who are in the area able to play the run. So offensive coaches regularly talk about a term called counting the box. And what that means is the concept of counting the number of defenders around the line of scrimmage who are able to play the run. Now, the Vikings had the 30th ranked rushing offense in the entire NFL. That's out of 32 teams. They were basically one of the worst teams rushing the ball in the entire NFL last year. That's because the Vikings were terrible at running the ball when they had favorable numbers in the box. They were unable to win matchups and block effectively. Week 5 against the Eagles, the Vikings motioned their tight end Kyle Rudolph tight to the line of scrimmage. This gave the Vikings even numbers in the box. 6 defenders for the Eagles and 6 blockers for the Vikings to block them. 6 on 6. And yet, even when the Vikings had favorable numbers in the box, they couldn't win matchups. Another example is week 14 against the Seattle Seahawks. It's the 4th quarter. It's 3rd and goal on the 2-yard line. The Vikings are down 6-0. Just over 9 minutes left in the game. The Vikings need a touchdown at this moment. They need a touchdown right now. They got good numbers in the box, 6-on-6, and yet they couldn't get any push and were stopped. And here's what's really sad about this information. I looked around the entire NFL, at the Patriots, the Cowboys, the Rams, the Saints, the Eagles, the Chargers, even the Giants with Saquon Barkley. Most teams don't even need even numbers in the box to run the ball well. And when you look around the NFL, this is how most teams who run the ball effectively are able to make things happen. Look at the Cowboys. Even when the Cowboys last year were in situations where they were down in the numbers. There's an example here. They're 7-on-6. 6 guys to block 7 defenders. They still ran for a 15-yard gain. If you take close notice, they run to the left and don't even block the farthest guy to the right. My point is this, though. Most NFL teams were running the ball successfully even when you count the box and they were short a guy. They had 6 guys to block 7 defenders. Not only could the Vikings not run the ball in scenarios where they were down 1 when you count the box, they couldn't even win even matchups with 6-on-6 or 7-on-7. Their offensive line got beat over and over and over again. Now, another issue with the 2018 Vikings offense was how frequently they sabotaged themselves. A lot of self-sabotage went on last season. One of the most surprising moments of the 2018 NFL season, if you ask me, was Week 3 when the Buffalo Bills crushed the Minnesota Vikings. It was surprising. Oh, wow. What the heck? On offense, the Vikings were terrible that day. They were horrible execution. The O-line could not stop the Bills' 4-man rush. Kirk Cousins had 2 fumbles. He also missed multiple throws on 3rd down. Adam Thielen had a crucial drop on 3rd down. And even there was a pass that popped up in the air and was intercepted. A lack of attention to detail and poor execution repeatedly cost the Vikings offense in 2018. This is why Week 3, the Bills dominated the Vikings 27-6. It was a surprise to me, but actually a recurring trend, which is a lack of execution by the Vikings offense. Another example of this is Week 8 against the Saints. The Vikings were leading 13-10 right before halftime. It's 1st and 10. There's 1 minute and 11 seconds left before halftime. The Vikings have the ball on the 18-yard line. It's very important. 18-yard line. They're in the red zone, about to extend their lead. 1st and 10, and then Adam Thielen fumbles the ball. The Saints return the fumble 54 yards, plus there was an unsportsmanlike penalty on the Vikings. And now suddenly the field is flipped. Remember that 18-yard line, the Saints now have the ball. Instead of the Vikings about to score and extend their lead, the Saints now have the ball, coincidentally also on the 18-yard line. And the Saints quickly scored a touchdown. So now the Vikings went into halftime down 17-13, rather than going into the half with a lead and potentially a 2-score lead. Over and over again, the Vikings shot themselves in the foot with poor execution. Now, one of the weirdest parts of the 2018 Vikings season was the philosophical differences and very vocal differences between the Vikings head coach Mike Zimmer and their former offensive coordinator John DeFilippo. The head coach Mike Zimmer wanted the offense to run the ball more. He said it over and over again very vocally. And John DeFilippo seemed to have his own plan, and the two of them never really seemed like a good fit together. Now, after 13 games into the Vikings season, John DeFilippo got fired. And so the question to me was, how much of the Vikings' struggles on offense were the fault of their former offensive coordinator, John DeFilippo? And when I look at the film, John DeFilippo was not completely inept at play design. He's not an idiot, and he's not a terrible offensive play caller. One example of creative play design by John DeFilippo is a play Week 5 against the Eagles. The Vikings start to play with an orbit motion by Stephon Diggs. They then run an inside zone fake. They fake the run inside to freeze the defender on the edge. And then they throw the ball outside to Stephon Diggs. This is a really clever play design. What it does is create a 2-on-2 matchup outside on the right. There are 2 receivers blocking 2 defenders, and that puts Stephon Diggs in a race with a defender chasing him from the other side of the field. It's a good play. It's a good gain. And often, the Vikings had good play design that was wasted with poor execution and poor blocking. There's a different play in the same game. The Vikings run a screen with Stephon Diggs to the left. It's a great setup. there are two offensive linemen blocking a tiny corner and a linebacker. It puts Stephon Diggs in a race with the safety who's really far away in the middle of the field. The problem is that the linemen miss their blocks, and the Vikings miss out on what probably would have been a touchdown. John DeFilippo, the former Vikings offensive coordinator, was not an idiot. He had some good ideas, but here is where I think he missed the mark. I don't think he did a good enough job adapting his offense to the weaknesses of his personnel. And what that really means is I think he could have done a better job building his offense around the strengths of his players. A great example of this is the Vikings tight end Kyle Rudolph. Just recently in June 2019, the Vikings re-signed Kyle Rudolph to a 4-year, $36 million extension. Kyle Rudolph is a great pass catcher. There's a reason why the Vikings gave him a contract extension. He's a really bad matchup for linebackers trying to cover him running routes. He also has great hands. He contributes often on third down. However, he's a terrible, terrible run blocker. And I mean awful. He's soft, he gives poor effort, and he's not a very skilled blocker. Kyle Rudolph was not going to push anybody around in the running game last year. It's not going to happen. It's not who he is as a player. And yet, for some reason, that's exactly what was asked of him in 2018. And it frequently cost the Vikings. Regularly, he would miss his block, and often the guy who was assigned to block would make a tackle on the running back. He was the reason for a lot of their struggles running the football. Now, should Kyle Rudolph be a better run blocker? Yes, absolutely. He's getting paid millions of dollars. He should improve in that area. But asking him to be a big part of the running game last year was just setting him up to fail. Setting him up to fail and setting the Vikings up to fail. And this is not the only example of that. The Vikings offensive line in general was just not very skilled. And often the former offensive coordinator, John DeFilippo, would call complicated running schemes that involved linemen pulling for blocks and making more difficult types of blocks. Given the ability level of the Vikings offensive line, these were simply unrealistic expectations for their running game. Now look, I cannot imagine how difficult it must have been for John DeFilippo to leave the Eagles, a team that had a really talented offensive line, and then suddenly be working with the Vikings' terrible offensive line, right? That's a shock, and he had bad personnel overnight. But the play calling still needed to adjust, and it never did. It never changed. He never adjusted his approach. Week 14 against the Seahawks, the right tackle was asked to pull and block an interior linebacker. He failed. And by the way, this is the same guy that all year struggled to make very simple, easy blocks. He couldn't block a normal zone concept where he steps in one direction and literally blocks the very first thing he sees. Pulling is a more difficult type of block, and yet they expected him to be able to do that? I don't get it. I really believe at times the Vikings running game should have been dumbed down to fit the players they were dealing with. John DeFilippo, the former offensive coordinator for the Vikings, had good ideas, but he didn't do a good enough job adjusting his offense to fit his players. And after week 14, he was fired. He was out. But you got to be clear here, no matter who the Vikings offensive coordinator was, the offensive line was going to be a problem, right? They couldn't block a four-man rush. They couldn't win when they had good matchups on the inside in the box. No matter who the offensive coordinator was, that guy was going to struggle. But John DeFilippo could have done a better job handling the situation and setting up his players to succeed. Now, honestly, I never really understand why the Vikings even hired John DeFilippo in the first place. But before the 2018 NFL season started, the New York Giants made a move to hire the Vikings assistant coach, Kevin Stefanski, as their offensive coordinator. The Giants tried to hire that guy away, and the Vikings blocked the move. The Vikings said, "You're not taking our assistant," and they would not let Kevin Stefanski leave. Now, if you don't know, you can block an assistant coach from leaving unless they're leaving to be a head coach. So on February 10th, 2018, last year, the Vikings head coach made a big stink to keep this guy Kevin Stefanski around, even though the day before on the 9th, he had just hired John DeFilippo to be the next Vikings offensive coordinator. And what's interesting to me is that after 13 games, DeFilippo was fired and replaced by that guy, Kevin Stefanski. And throughout the first 13 games of the season, Mike Zimmer, the Vikings head coach, repeatedly called out the offensive coaching, called out the plays being called. And it was very weird to me. He kept saying, we're not running the ball enough, this and that. And I don't understand why he hired him. Why did Mike Zimmer hire John DeFilippo? You don't hire a guy and then micromanage him. Let him do the job you hired him to do. The whole thing was weird to me. I just don't understand why you would even hire John DeFilippo in the first place if you didn't respect his approach. I don't really believe the Vikings head coach Mike Zimmer allowed John DeFilippo to be in his best position to succeed. So again, I don't understand why Zimmer wasted 13 games with John DeFilippo. Didn't seem like he respected him. Didn't seem like he liked him very much. It seemed like he should have been Kevin Stefanski all along. But now it is. Currently, he is the Vikings offensive coordinator. And for the last 3 games of the 2018 season, Kevin Stefanski, from week 15 on, was the new guy calling plays in Minnesota. For one game, by the way, with the new offensive coordinator, for one game, the Vikings offense looked pretty good. In week 15, they put up 41 points on the Miami Dolphins. And I would even say, by the way, the first drive against the Dolphins was their best offensive drive of the entire 2018 season. Early in that game, they had a 6-on-6 situation in the box, and they won. And running the ball more frequently made play-action passes more effective. By the way, in case you don't know, play-action is a fake run pass. It's a bluff. You fake the run, and then you throw the ball. But it only works if it's convincing. In order to run a play-action pass, you first need to either establish the run or make it clear your team is trying to run the football. That way, the run fake is believable. And that, by the way, is why consistently running the ball matters. Even if you aren't getting a ton of yards, running the football is valuable because it sets up play-action passes. Week 16 against the Lions, the Vikings ran a play-action fake. The run fake pulled the Lions defensive back number 28, Quandre Diggs, inside. The run fake influenced the defender to a different part of the field, which allowed Kyle Rudolph to get wide open. Consistently running the ball and using play action is very important to the Vikings head coach Mike Zimmer. And I think he was right to believe in it, right? Running the ball, first of all, it takes more time off the clock. It helps your defense get rest. Mike Zimmer was a defensive-minded head coach. But it also helps your quarterback. The Vikings quarterback, Kirk Cousins, was way more effective when you had a healthy running game and was able to use play action. Now, the Vikings' new offensive coordinator, Kevin Stefanski, made a number of small changes that instantly made a difference. First of all, he very quickly accepted that complicated running schemes were not going to work for the Vikings' offensive linemen. His offensive linemen were simply not very talented. He stopped asking them to pull and make more difficult types of blocks. He also began using tight end Kyle Rudolph differently, asking less of him as a blocker. Instead of asking him to push guys around, they used him to bait defenders into the backfield and take them out of the play. Another small change they made was they began to get the ball out of Kirk Cousins' hands more quickly. He was playing hot potato with the football. From the shotgun, he would catch the ball, take a zero drop, which means that he would catch the ball and immediately throw the football. From under center, he'd take 3-step drops and get the ball out as quickly as possible. And the changes helped. But even with the new offensive coordinator, the Vikings still had the same glaring issue. Their offensive line still struggled. Guys lost a ton of matchups on the offensive line, and times when Kirk Cousins didn't get the ball out of his hands immediately, he was screwed. Again, he basically had to play hot potato with the football. Oh, crap, get rid of it. If he didn't do that, it was over for him because the Vikings could not protect their quarterback. Any kind of complication, like, defenders crossing at the line of scrimmage or a delayed blitz, would inevitably cause a sack for the Vikings. And the running game still struggled. At one point in the Lions game, the Vikings had a 5-on-5 inside the box. 5 defenders, 5 offensive linemen to block them, and nobody in the middle of the field. If the running back could get through, he was gone. This is a dream scenario for an offensive line, and yet still, they were unable to execute their blocks. So look, Kirk Cousins was not the problem for the 2018 Vikings offense. He makes too many weird mistakes for me to be comfortable calling him an elite quarterback. He's a tier below guys like Tom Brady and Drew Brees. but he still is a good quarterback. In fact, the fact he was able to throw 30 touchdowns and over 4,000 yards with that offensive line is a borderline miracle. It deserves your respect. Kirk Cousins put up incredible numbers with a terrible, terrible offensive line. So going into the 2019 NFL season, these are my biggest questions for the Vikings offense. Number one is this: will their offensive line improve? This was their biggest issue last season. They did let a few guys go, but their offensive line is still very much a question mark and very much should be a question mark. Their offensive line. That is what I want to watch next year for the Vikings offense. The second question I have is, will there be coaching turmoil in Minnesota? To me, Mike Zimmer, a defensive-minded head coach, meddled with the offense last year. And that's, in my book, a big no-no. You don't do that. And there's a couple reasons why Mike Zimmer might have been so vocal about the offensive line struggles and the play calling. One belief is maybe he was trying to shift blame away from him to someone else and protect himself. It seems silly to me to believe that Mike Zimmer might be on the hot seat and potentially could be fired. But hey, that's a possible scenario. What I think is even more likely is that, it seems like someone forced him to hire John DeFilippo, the former offensive coordinator, and it seems like Mike Zimmer never really wanted him. But either way, first of all, Mike Zimmer has his guy now, Kevin Stefanski, running the offense. But I'm still curious to see next year in 2019, this upcoming season, is there any kind of coaching drama in Minnesota? That's what I want to see. The offensive line, is there coaching drama? The third question I have about the Vikings offense is, will Kirk Cousins take a step forward? He's a really good quarterback. If you support him, he can win a lot of games in the NFL, but he makes far too many weird mistakes. He needs to eliminate those if he wants to take his game to the next level. I like Kirk. He's good. He's not elite, but he could be if he made fewer weird, quirky mistakes and lacked attention to detail. Now, finally, my fourth question about the Vikings offense going into next season is, in fact, their running back, Dalvin Cook. Is Dalvin Cook any good? I'll be honest, he did not impress me on film last year. Now, I do give him the benefit of the doubt because the last 2 seasons, he struggled with injuries. But to me, Dalvin Cook looks just like another guy. He's a solid professional running back and nothing really special. The best backs in the NFL, guys like Ezekiel Elliott, Saquon Barkley, Todd Gurley, they can do it all. They can break tackles at the line of scrimmage. They can run through arm tackles. They can pass block. And they can contribute by catching passes in the passing game. And I'm really curious to see what kind of performance we get from Dalvin Cook this year. Will he take a step forward? Is he potentially a really top-level running back? Or is it more likely that he's just another guy? He's a fine, solid professional running back who is nothing that special. That's what I'm curious to see. And really, in general, guys, that's all I have. That is my entire analysis of the 2018 Vikings offense.